We all remember Zoochosis, right? You know, that one horror game you play as a night zookeeper tasked with taking care of the animals while they mutate whatever these things are? This was a game that I was very excited for. All the trailers made the game look fantastic, promising an expansive bodycam horror experience with animations that looked generally amazing. And then the game released. And the game looked not only noticeably different from the trailers in terms of quality, but also lacked many of the things that were shown off in the trailers, such as these hands hitting the windows or crawling through vents, and something as simple as the mutated animals roaming the halls. I personally have my own little story about Zoochosis' release. I played the game as soon as I could on release day, having stayed up till 12 AM so I could play it just as soon as it came out. And I did for about an hour. And the game just didn't work. I'm just gonna come out and say it. It didn't work. There was no way to cure the animals, no matter how long I spent looking at their symptoms, figuring out what disease they had and shooting however many darts they needed. It didn't give me a single indication I was curing them. I spent an hour going between the animal habitats, but no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't. So I went to bed, woke up the next day, and just decided I was just gonna play this game by killing all the animals, which has no consequences anyway, but I used that system to get a few endings and called it a night. And that was the last I touched Zoochosis. That was until recently. Because just out of curiosity and having heard they're making another game, I wanted to see if Zoochosis actually lives up to his trailers after a year of updates. Considering they've made 49 patches and 12 major updates to the game, what better time to look back and see what Zoochosis has to offer in 2025. So sit back, relax, and let's get started, shall we? For this video, I'm mainly going to focus on the current release of Zoochosis, but when needed I'll use the release version to compare the improvements made over the last year, because that's mainly what this video is about. We begin Zoochosis like every great game, by signing an NDA that makes you do things I'm like 99% sure an NDA doesn't cover. And once that's done, we're handed a body cam, which already looks significantly better from when I first played the game. Like, just the side-by-side difference is literally night and day. Even just graphically, the whole game looks so much better and much closer to what the trailers advertised. We are then injected with something completely against our will, and we wake up, we're in the break room, where Doc immediately throws us into work, teaching us how to load the train, ignore the mysterious banging behind that one locked door, travel around the zoo using said train, make animal food, and use our equipment to find out what sickness the animals have. Then we return to the train and mix a cure, which has been practically reworked from the ground up compared to the release version. In that version, you need to narrow down exactly what symptoms they had, then pick out the one cure out of the entire list. Here, however, you need to just click the symptoms and voila, cure, which is such a simple system that I can't even begin to imagine why this wasn't like the one they went with, instead of just like having the player scroll through this massive list. Like, this annoyed me so much when I played the release version, you don't even know. Another difference is the game immediately telling the player about parasites, and how we need to shoot the one that's acting like it's sick, but really isn't, instructing us to use the UV light to find the sick animal and shoot it, which clears up a lot of misconceptions in the version I originally played, as I didn't even realize the animals were spitting up parasites till my second enclosure, because the game just didn't explain these things and just had us curing the sick animals and pretty much ignoring the parasites, which are, you know, the whole reason the game exists. We then head back to the hub, where Doc leaves us alone in the zoo. And this is the game's attempted introduction to their choice and consequence system. Let me give you an example. After Doc leaves, you hear a sudden banging on the entrance door. Interacting with it reveals it's your wife, who's worried that you've been left inside. To put her at ease, the game tells you to grab some meat from storage. Not as an optional quest or anything, but as something you have to do. Which leads to many players just doing that. The thing is, from what I can tell, this locks you out of the good ending, which is insanely dumb considering if it's a choice and consequence system, it should be clear that every single one of these choices is optional, and aren't presented as something you need to do to progress. And the game tries to have you make multiple decisions like this throughout the game's runtime that will influence what ending you get, which wouldn't be that bad if the story was actually engaging. I mean this with the utmost respect for a late screenwriter of Zoochosis, and to anyone else who worked on the game's story. But it's such a drag. The dialogue is just so weirdly delivered by every voice actor in the game, and even then the material they have to work with ain't the best either.
put on the MFE.
What's that?
Mobile fecal extractor. In simpler terms, a shit sucker. You've eaten shit before. Now you're going to suck it.
Are you out of your mind? There's a parasite in you. You'll mutate soon. Do you think anyone will let you out of here? Anyway, it's up to you, but if I close this door, I won't let you in.
Now, for everyone unfamiliar, here's a brief summary of Zoochosis' story. After our protagonist Paul returns from the second enclosure, Doc informs us there's some new meat waiting for us. After pulling the lever, this is revealed to be a human body. Why isn't it in a body bag like the trailers? I have no clue. Again, another weird creative choice. But here we are. Paul is rightfully concerned and calls Doc immediately, with Doc basically telling him, "Bad luck, get to work, you chose this." The player can then either choose to save the girl or grind her up. I saved her, as not doing so basically dooms the run. After the third enclosure, you learn that the woman you saved is actually a reporter, whose name is Sarah Watkins, who got in too deep and was kidnapped by Doc, presumably for knowing way too much, as she's even able to identify that we're infected. Upon trying to leave once more, we're shown that something is clogging the bio-waste filter. Opening it reveals a human hand, which we use to enter Doc's secret lab. Sarah then informs Paul that by the end of the night, he'll end up just like the animals we've been fighting, and if he wants a chance to be cured and go back to his family, he needs to work with her. Inside the lab, it's revealed that Doc and other employees introduced the parasites, hoping to study them. For what? Your guess is as good as mine. We then get another call from Doc, who tells us to kill Sarah, and this is where a lot of major ending decisions are made. Ending 1 sees Paul following through at killing Sarah, which in the end gets him sacrificed to the Mother, a creature who produces the parasites. This also happens like 2 more times, just in slightly different ways. If you instead choose to talk to Sarah, she gives us information on a poison for the parasites, which then leads to a minigame where we need to find the female parasite. Failing to do so leads to Paul, Sarah, and Doc all dying to Mother. However, succeeding leads to Mother only eating Doc, and we get our first and final look at Mother herself. Paul then spits up a dead parasite, signifying that the poison is working, and Paul and Sarah get out of the zoo, stealing Doc's car. There's also some other miscellaneous endings, such as one where you sit on the NDA screen for too long, Doc will taunt Paul with recordings from his suicide hotline, and if you still don't sign the document, Doc will just inject Paul and grind him up. Or if you just ignore the entire story completely, Paul will mutate in the train and jump Doc. And that's effectively it for the story. There's not much else, only really slight alterations how the ending plays out. From a character perspective, there's also not a lot to talk about. Paul is... well, Paul is Paul. He's a dumbass with absolutely zero self-preservation skills, or any reaction to literally anything going on around him, other than the occasional, oh crap. Sarah is also very one-note, just driven by finding the truth and getting revenge on Doc, who is ironically the best written character, which ain't a high bar. He's surprisingly funny sometimes, and I do mean sometimes, and is interesting on a surface level, mainly because he talks the most out of any character. Now, before getting into the gameplay, I wanted to just vent my frustrations with how this game is designed. When you first see this enclosure menu, your brain immediately thinks, oh my god, look at all of these enclosures, I cannot wait to explore them and uncover all the mysteries and sketchy things this company's been doing. Then you get back to the trade and realize there are only 4 accessible enclosures, you only get a fraction of the story from each enclosure, New Game Plus unlocks new story aspects but wipes everything from your last run, and you cannot piece the full game together without a wiki. Like, I understand if New Game Plus added a new enclosure, but instead they just shuffle which ones you get and lock a previous one, which frankly sucks. Especially since they're constantly adding new animals to the game, and the whole appeal of Zoochosis is its animals and mutations, and having the pool being limited even now after so many updates annoys me. Maybe it's just impossible with how the game's been made or pitched, but it's one of those things that seems like a no-brainer and just isn't done for the sake of it. But getting it back on track to the main gameplay of Zoochosis, this has seen an entire overhaul compared to the release version. In the release version, we do all the usual checkups, figure out what illness they have, then either have an extremely underwhelming boss fight with no stakes because you can't die and your only way to cure them is to either kill them or feed them food with meat and then shoot them, or just cure the animal and have no fight at all, because that can happen. In the updated version, however, you're immediately shown the mutated animal as it runs through the halls of its enclosure, which actually builds tension towards the upcoming encounter, so props for that. You can also be jump scared at random by roaming parasites as shown in the trailers, so it's clear that the team has really put some effort into getting the game to match what they advertised. The only thing now missing from the trailers is any depiction of the mother outside of the endings. Like, I've noticed that you can sometimes hear something grabbing at the train, but there's nothing visually to depict that that's the mother. You still do all the usual checkups and find out their illness, but this time when the animal mutates, you need to shoot them with a bunch of lethal injections which are provided to the player during the fight, and are used to actually just knock out the sick animal instead of curing them, allowing us to use an actual cure to help the animal and recover a parasite. We're also given a health bar, which is affected by a multitude of things, if that be some sort of ranged attack or the mutant animals tossing you around. Which, stakes people, stakes! The only issue I can really note about this segment is the clipping of the animals, because sometimes we just get stuck in a wall or out of bounds, making it impossible to do anything, but other than that, it's a really solid gameplay loop that I enjoy 10 times more than what was presented at release. When you go to leave, however, you can see the infection spreading through Paul's body, as his hands and arms are being covered in bumps and his veins are becoming progressively more visible, reminding me a lot of how the Kara spread in Subnautica, and how after major events the bacteria would progress. But that's about all I can say for Zoochosis. When the game first came out in late September last year, a lot of the complaints centered around the game feeling rushed to one note and hard to understand, lacking a lot of promised mechanics, cutscenes, or interactions. And in the last year, the team has solved a lot of the gameplay problems, but I do still agree with the note that the game feels rushed in one note. Which is a shame, as I previously stated that I was really excited for this game. But I guess even after a whole year of updates, you just can't change the fundamentals of a broken game. But if you remember from the intro, I said that the Zoochosis devs are currently in development of another game. So let's talk about that. In July of this year, the trailer for Hellmart went up alongside a Steam page, and it wasn't long before people, mainly Fiznom you all probably know, started to connect the dots. Namely, how both games made cinematic trailers with zero gameplay and are being pushed by the same outlets that promoted Zoochosis, using Zoochosis' exact marketing strategies down to the wording on their Steam page. You can read a lot more of this on Fiznom's thread, which I'll have linked in the description, but just know, I'm not pulling this out of my ass. Because with all the evidence, I'm at least 99% sure it's the same people trying to avoid the backlash they got for Zoochosis, while having a small team continue to interact with the community on Discord and work on updates. So, dear viewer, you may be wondering, what even is Hellmart? Hellmart's trailer shows us working at a small grocery store, as we're hunted by this weird RE8 baby looking creature, with the player hiding behind, clearly, and I mean very clearly, AI generated art. And with the demo having recently released, I decided what the hell, might as well give it a try, so I streamed it. And I was pleasantly surprised by the game. I think it shows promise, but still falls into a lot of the same traps that Zoochosis did. Obviously, the first thing I looked for was AI art, which thankfully they removed, and the jump scares I encountered were actually really good. I specifically had a lot of fun with the night segment, where the player had to either decline to let people in or not, clean up anomalies, and fight against a creature trying to break in. But those are really my only positives. The gameplay is boring and repetitive, but it's clear that the developers are learning. I just wish they did so under the same name, so we can celebrate when they make something good, and look back and mock their previously mediocre work. This video was a little more negative than normal, which I'm sorry about, but it's how I feel about the topic. I know this is effectively beating a dead horse, but I wanted to give Zoochosis a chance to see if after an entire year plus of updates, that they could salvage this mediocre mess into something enjoyable. And I mean, they kinda did, not really. I'd recommend Zoochosis as a game to just shut your brain off and look at the cool designs. And if you're someone who can easily do that, go right ahead. But if you're like me and love a game's story, atmosphere, and character, don't bother. It's not worth the headache. But with that said, I've been Core, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in whatever I make next. Bye bye!